Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Hello, and welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to this PSI Effect podcast, where you are here with myself, Nuge, and Frankie. We are your host in this space, and we are glad that you are here. I want to welcome all of our newbies and thank the newbies as well as the seasoned listeners for being here in this space. We really do appreciate it. We'd like for you to just take a moment to make sure that you are subscribed to our channel and to the social spaces that we participate in. And go ahead and give us some likes, some thumbs up, some subscriptions. I guess they say subscribe and not subscription, right? Subscribe to the channels.
Yeah, that's right. They know what we're talking about.
They know what we're talking about. That's right.
Exactly.
What you talking about, Willis? But we really do appreciate it. It does help the algorithms show us favor and get out there into the ether and let other people find us as well. So we really do appreciate it. And as always, before we jump into things, Frankie always tells us something interesting. So what's going on, Frankie?
Man, we're recording early in the week this go around. And usually early in the week, that means you're coming off a weekend, all rested and relaxed. And that is not the case. I talked about this before where I had some kind of reunion event and I was probably partying more than I should have. But this past weekend was one of those where I felt like I just couldn't catch my breath because there was just so much stuff going on. Friday was, a playoff lacrosse game way out in Pinehurst, North Carolina, which was about an hour and a half drive. We didn't get back home until close to 11, but it was a great experience to get out there. Then Saturday, busy all morning with some meetings and practice. Then I had to go, or I got to, let me get it right. I got to go help one of the ladies, one of the elder ladies in our church who had some stuff break down at her house and needed some stuff fixed. And then my wife and I got to go later that night. My wife and I got to go to a formal event, which was nice. But again, another late night out till, 11, 12 o'clock, which is well past my bedtime. And then on Sunday, I get super adventurous and I decide that I need to go ahead and do the brakes on my car. So I did rotors and pads all the way around my car, ordered the parts, got my son out there to help me. So it was a good project. We got it done. The car stops successfully. The wheels stay attached.
No leftover parts?
No leftover parts. We were really cautious, but no leftover parts, which was great. But it was good. And it was really cool because during that time when I was working with my son on the project and we were getting the things done, because, we're not professional mechanics, so it took us about 4 hours to get it done on all four wheels. But he was asking me about because he's about to be off to college, he was asking me about some of my college experience and specifically about, my fraternity and some of the relationships that I built and how I keep those relationships going today with that group of people that I had so close to me at that time during college. And he was asking me about that. I don't know if he's thinking about that for when he goes off to college. If that happens, great, but I'm just more focused on him getting his education, finding his lifelong friends and people that can support him. And yeah, but I'm not gonna get all sentimental, but it was a great weekend, busy weekend, a little tired, but I'm excited to get on and talk about some good stuff today.
That father-son time, I'm sure, is just invaluable for you. So I'm glad that you all had a chance to have that time together. And your description has actually led us or given us a segue into our topic today, which is auditing your circle. And so, we're going to be talking about the folks that you surround yourself with and the folks that surround themselves with you. And to start us off, I just want to start with a Jim Rohn quote. Jim Rohn is a guru in the self-help, sales, and marketing growth sector. He's been around for a very long time. But one of the things that he always says or said is, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And, when you think about it, those folks that are around you most of the time are the folks that you are generally most influenced by.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because if that's where you're spending time, that's how you're going to be shaped. You're in those same environments. I've made reference to it before. There's a Bible verse that says iron sharpens iron. So if you're around other people that are of iron, y'all are going to rub off on one another and make each other sharp. That same holds true for other characteristics that you and other people may have. Those characteristics are going to rub off on you and you rub off on them, and you sort of shape the countenance, shape the identity of one another.
And so I would just ask our audience, if you think about the folks that you spend the most time with, if you average out the, your mindset, your ambitions, right, your health of your five closest friends or the five closest people that you surround yourself with, what would the result be? Would it excite you and get you fired up, or would it make you somewhat afraid?
What would you, in terms of being afraid, can you describe more of what would I have to be afraid of? What would be something I'd be afraid of?
Well, and maybe afraid is probably the wrong word to use, but maybe a better word would be, um, just like concerned about your growth, concerned about, where you are and how you're advancing, how you're getting along, if you're, meeting your goals, those kinds of things. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
I got you. I got you. And I guess as we're saying, and we may come back to it during the conversation, I don't think that we're telling people that if somebody is not helping them achieve their goal, that they should immediately cut them off and cut them out of their lives. I don't think that's what we're trying to get at today, but I think it is important for us to take into account and take inventory of, how the people around us are influencing us and how that impacts our pursuit of our goals, our pursuit of growth. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, just cut them like, oh, you're not moving me forward. I got to cut you off. We don't want to make people seem like they're commodities, but we do have to
Yeah.
be honest with ourselves about how they are influencing us in our approach to what we need to get done.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I know that we all have folks that are around us that, aren't necessarily, you know, uh advancing us forward in our goals and some of the things that we want to achieve in life. But, those folks they're still good people,
Absolutely.
they're still good people. So we're not saying that at all. But, the thing that I want to stress here is that if you do have goals, if there are things that you really want to accomplish, I think you have to take a look at, those folks who are actually giving you encouragement and influence to achieve those goals versus those folks who, um, speak negativity in your life and, give you the opposite effect. And surely at the end of the day, the decision is yours either way,
Right.
right? You just have to be aware and understand how to manage that.
Yeah, and I like this mental exercise of averaging the five people around you. So when I think about averaging, my mind goes to mathematics. I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I start thinking about numbers and things like that. What are the categories? I think you mentioned a couple of categories. If I wanted to go through the mental exercise of being able to inventory the five closest people around me, and I wanted to look at some different quote unquote fields to measure, to incorporate into that average, what are some of the things that I should be looking at?
Things like, mindset,
Mhm.
how your mindset may be aligned,
Mhm.
what type of ambition
Okay.
um you guys have, how that might align, um health practices, um certainly, moral standards, I think, would be pretty high on the list. Moral standards, integrity, those types of things. And
Okay.
then, just honestly, things that you like to do. What type of hobbies do you have? Do
Okay.
you like
So
sports? Don't like sports?
interests.
Um
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. So I guess if I really wanted to, I could kind of create some little categories and put in little, and this is just strictly for a mental exercise. I could create these little categories and maybe assign number values in there based off of that, and literally do some math
Dude,
to
you
kind
are
of,
really being nerdy now.
I know, right? I could
Well,
literally do some math. Seriously, if I wanted to see, it's like, the data is telling me.
look over your shoulder and say, what number am I?
And I look, hey, no, 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 you can't look over here. Don't look over here. Nothing
Uh,
to see over here.
but
But it's
when you think about it, that there are I think there are people in your life who may represent, let's just say, an anchor, right? An anchor we know holds you down or pulls you down, right?
So we're talking
And
about, just to clarify, we're talking about negative connotation of
yes,
an anchor.
yes,
Okay.
negative connotation, right? Um, and it's not necessarily that that anchor is an enemy. It's just that it could be someone who doesn't share your ideas about where you want to go, um, doesn't have the same drive or same ambition that you may have, to grow or to do things in life. They may be quite comfortable and quite content where they are, and they don't want to grow and they don't want to do anything else. And that's perfectly fine. All I'm saying is that, recognizing that you may have some folks around you who may act as an anchor, and you just have to decide, based on Frankie's numbers situation, his number criteria, where that person may fit in your life.
Yeah, and that idea of an anchor paints a really good mental picture for me, because if I think about a huge ship going across the ocean, and what does an anchor do? The anchor stops the forward momentum of that ship.
Mhm.
Pulls down and stops forward momentum and holds it in place. So, that if we have folks in our lives that are like that and we're viewing that as a negative, we have to really be honest about that. And like we said before, I don't think we're saying you immediately have to cut those people off, but you have to be honest about what that's doing in your life and your pursuit on your journey. And you have to make a decision. Is this anchor worth carrying forward on the journey? Or is it going to ultimately keep me from achieving my goal?
Or, the other part of that is, how much time do you want to spend
Mm.
with individuals who are, your perceived anchors in your life? Like you said, we don't want to cut anybody off. That's not what we're saying at all. Those are folks that you could love very much. But how much time do you want to give them, um, versus the opposite end of the spectrum? People who maybe, let's say, they're the engine to the ship, right? The
Hmm.
engine can move you forward, right? The engine is pushing forward to get you to a destination. And so how much time do you want to spend on the anchors in your life versus the engines that are helping you, and maybe not physically helping you, but
Hmm.
just emotionally helping you, right? Achieve your goals or move in the direction that you want for yourself.
Anchors and engines. I like that analogy. The engine analogy. When we start talking about engines, actually, we start talking about both of them. I think about specific experiences that I've had where there are some folks that were anchors, that have been anchors. They're still in my life, but they're definitely anchors. Folks that might be caught up in, the good old, the idea of, oh, back in the day, this is how we used to do it. Back when we were young, this is how it was. That was the best time ever. And they get stuck there and they want to try to hold us there. I've been on that side of it too. And then for the engine, I mean, one of the prime examples of me having an engine in my life was that of my wife pushing me forward on things that, I was on the fence in terms of motivation of goals that I thought I could achieve, but she definitely encouraged and pushed and served as that engine to overcome that inertia that I had to get moving towards a goal. So, yeah, I like that analogy of an engine versus an anchor, and how they push you and push you versus hold you in place.
And we all have them, right? I just think that we unconsciously just let that part of a life happen, right? It
Hmm.
just kind of flows. I don't think that we really internalize it enough to really separate it out. But having a partner, as you mentioned, your wife, who is in your corner and giving you that encouragement and pushing you to keep that drive, I think is hugely important. And that kind of goes back to we've always talked in this space about accountability partners,
Yes.
and having those folks around you that can tell you those things that you need to hear, not not those things that you want to hear.
It's
They
a big
tell you those
difference.
things that, yeah, they tell you those things that you need to hear. And then it's up to you if you want to accept that word or not.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's very, very good. And I believe that all of us, if we just take a few minutes to give it some consideration, if we take that pause, we can identify situations where we have been in a situation where we were dealing with anchors and we were dealing with engines. But again, I think it's just not at top of mind all the time when we're talking to people, because we're just talking to people that we love and respect, right? That's
Mhm.
people that we've known for a long time. The guys back on the block.
Right.
That kind of thing. So, but I think you do have to be cognizant of um, the folks that are in your life, and either helping you or hindering you where you.
And I think there's a temporal nature, a time element associated or situational element associated with that too. Because, if we look at who's or take inventory of who's around us when everything's good, things are going well, it might be a different group of people that we find around us when we've had our setback, when we're going
Mhm.
through something difficult. I think
Yeah,
even, and that in and of itself is telling whether someone might fall into that engine or anchor category. So I think there's a situational element involved in this discernment as well.
absolutely. And I think it's hard because, as I was talking about, guys that from back in the day, girls that from back in the day. I'm kind of old school folks. Back in the day, everybody was a guy, and it was guys and gals, right? That was the
Right.
terminology.
Right.
But men and women growing up, boys and girls growing up, I think it's difficult because those are people that you have spent a great deal of time with.
Right.
You got some ride or dies in that group of people. And I think it's difficult because once you start to identify those anchors and those engines, I think people naturally start to feel some measure of guilt if they
Mm.
determine that there's certain people that are actually anchors in their life. And I think that's a really difficult um you know piece to assess and then to deal with.
Right. And I think that the way we deal with that guilt happens somewhat subconsciously as we're, progressing on our journey. Because if we think of our life as a story, good story's got a main character, and that main character has character progression where something in them changes along the way. And the main character in the first chapter of the book is very different from the main character in chapter 6 or 7, because things have
Uh,
happened along the way. And
uh-huh,
as that character changes, as our character changes, we may have to move in different spaces with different groups of people.
uh-huh,
And some of those folks that were with us early on in the story may not yet be equipped or are able to move in those same circles. Well, the
uh-huh,
reason I said I think it happens subconsciously is for a lot of people, one of the things they'll do is they keep their friends and
uh-huh.
their school friends, social friends as separate entities. All right, these are two separate groups. I move between them, but it's very rare that somebody will float between the two. Maybe I'm just, speaking about myself, but I've noticed that with some of my colleagues as well. It's like, all right, yeah, there's the work entity of me, and then there's this personal side of me where I'm hanging out with this group, but the folks that are in this group may not be able to operate in this level with me over here.
Yeah, and I don't think that you're wrong in that at all. And I understand what you're saying. I was guilty of that when I was in the workspace but mine was more self preservation, I think, because I learned early on that, social spaces and all that stuff was used as a tool for some leaders, against folk, and, for some employees against folks. And so I was very conscious of keeping those two worlds separate, mainly for my own personal self preservation.
Right.
And I know that, there are folks that now today that are in my life that I worked with, through the years, that we are indeed friends. But I was very careful about who I let on in that inner circle, because I just didn't want any I had seen too much happen. I didn't want any part of that. And so I think that there are a lot of people who have that type of um, thought process when separating work and home, work and personal. And I guess to some degree that you need to have that.
Uh-huh.
And I guess your reasons for that can be different. That was my story. So you make a very very good point about keeping those worlds separate. And so my question is like now. So how do we make the adjustments in the circle? I mean, we talked a little bit about our two worlds, work and personal. Like how do we make that adjustment?
That is the $1,000,000 question. I mean, because that feeling of guilt is real. And many times that can stay our hand where we won't take the action that we need to because of that guilt. We get caught up in these feelings of loyalty. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be loyal to people that have been friends in our lives for a really long time, but we have to be honest as we're progressing towards our goals. So, as we're starting to make these adjustments, we've got to really check in with ourselves. And this is kind of where, during the pause where we talk about that internal reflection, this is where it becomes really important to listen to your gut. What's your gut telling you about the situation? Hopefully you have, one of the things that's a requirement is that you have to know where you're going first.
Uh-huh.
Let's make sure that we level set with that expectation before you can
Uh-huh.
start adjusting your circle. You have to have a destination
Uh-huh.
first before you can make any kind of determination as to whether or not someone is an anchor or an engine on that path. And then you have to trust your gut. I think that's the first step. What's your gut telling you about what you know about your interactions with this person and how that stacks up to where you need to be or what you need to be to get to your destination?
And I think that rises up in you too. That gut check. I
Mhm.
think it just rises up. You know when there's something that's off.
Mhm.
Now the question is, do you always pay attention to it? Do you take it? Do you take it as real, or you just kind of brush it off?
Man, look, I'm gonna go. You're talking about the gut feeling. I'm gonna tell you, there are still plenty of lactose intolerance people who will go get them an ice cream cone just because they love ice cream, knowing that their gut cannot handle it. Guilty is charged. So,
Facts.
in terms of trust in your gut, maybe I put a little too much trust in my gut when I go get that ice cream cone when I know I shouldn't.
Right.
But no, you're right.
Those
That gut feeling is going to let you know.
Absolutely. And so then, so you have the gut check, right?
Mhm.
You kind of lean into your gut, what it's telling you. And then you have to deal with the folks that you have determined. You've gone over your list, you've checked the numbers, that there are certain people that are anchors in your life, right? And again, we want to reiterate that anchors are not bad people in your life. These are people that you know and love and appreciate being in your life, but they're just not um, helping you advance your life the way that you want it to go. Not helping you with your goals. They don't have the same ambition. They don't have the same drive. What have you? And so now you got to start working on figuring out how you're going to navigate those relationships, right? And so, what say you about that?
Slow and steady wins the race.
Mm,
When you're trying to navigate anything that has to do with the relationship between people, slowing it down is always going to be in our favor. We touched on that during the difficult conversations episode where we discussed the importance of slowing down the conversation. Where if we're trying to make adjustments in our relationship with somebody, we have to give it that same level of care and go slowly. And, that makes me think of, we could slowly pulling away or maybe not spending as much time or maybe declining an invitation here and there when we have an opportunity to do something else that is moving us towards that goal. I don't know what you would call that though.
yeah, I'm not sure what you would call it either, but I think I understand fully what you're saying, right? If you have if you have an opportunity for two social events, let's say, and one is going to just, one is going to really like energize you and hype you up and, give you all of this positive energy about reaching your goal or accomplishing something, right? Maybe you're on a self help journey or something versus, the other social event where you just, just kind of hanging out and having a good time, which there's nothing wrong with that. I guess you have to decide at that point which direction that you want to go in at that time, and how driven are you for um moving in a direction to reach
Mhm.
that goal or to satisfy that ambition that you have. So but I do like how you said slow and steady, because that is definitely the game. However, I will say, I don't know, if I look back at at my own self,
Mhm.
some of our listeners who are, on the younger side, the 18 and early 20s or whatever, and they meet that person, that special someone. A lot of times we're not trying to go slow. We want to get to know that person.
Well, easy now, easy now. We're trying to keep keeping it PG so we don't get,
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm not trying to get outside of the line there. No,
all
not at
right
all.
now.
But I just know, how excited, that people get, when there's a situation that is really moving them. They get really excited. And I know what it's like to meet somebody that you like for the first time, that feeling that you have. And it's the same kind of thing, I think, when you're talking about, your ambition and your drive to move you forward to something that you really want to do. How excited are you about that thing that you're working toward, right? You can be really excited about that like you can for anything else.
Hmm? It's about energy. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what it's about energy,
Yeah.
and I guess in the grand scheme of things, we're just talking about how are we allocating the energy that's needed to move us towards our goal. Like you said, we may have all this energy that we want to get this thing done, but we can't give it all of our energy if we're carrying all of these anchors. So sometimes we may have to sit those anchors down so we can move forward. It doesn't mean we cut people off coldly or anything like that. We can still love our friends and the people that we grew up with and that have been there with us through thick and thin. But if they're not equipped or they're not ready to move in the spaces that we need to move, that just doesn't mean we cut them off. That just means that maybe they're not our main source of advice and guidance as we're trying to navigate this journey towards our objective.
And this is probably a topic for a whole nother podcast. But, one thing I want to challenge the audience with is, those folks that you perceive to be anchors, um, they may come along at some point. They may get really excited about what you're into. They may want to know more about it, right?
Mhm.
And so that's even more reason not to just cut people off, because at some point you may be able to pay something forward and help someone else to rise up, right?
Yes.
To meet their own challenge and achieve their own goals that maybe they didn't have any clue that they had. you know
Yeah, that's right.
so yeah, there's
That's
some
right.
good that could come out of that.
And we got to be on the lookout for negativity too. And I think that's one thing. I don't know if we talked about it much in terms of anchors, but negativity is something that we have to be on the lookout for, especially, as we're trying to ignite. Well, if we want to ignite, we can't have somebody trying to put out the flame with
Right.
negativity. So those are the things that we have to start thinking about as we're starting to do that slow fade and maybe not spend so much energy in the anchor space and spend more energy in the engine space. uh, you know, Guarding our energy against negativity has to be a priority.
Absolutely. And just being aware of your own negativity,
Mm,
because you can bring yourself down if you're not careful. But yeah, I like how you said that, guarding your own energy, being on guard. I think that's really really important, because at the end of the day, it is, not being selfish or self-centered, but at the end of the day, I mean, it is about you when it comes to you achieving your goals. It is about you, and I
mhm.
think there is some degree of selfishness in that, because you do have to think about what you want to do. Now, I'm not saying you go out here and you're a jerk to people.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying at all. But if it comes down to, am I going to do this or am I going to do that, and this is going to help me achieve my goal, then you might want to make that decision, even
Mhm.
though you may. disappoint some people over here doesn't mean that that relationship is destroyed. It just means that you have to, do something that's important to you at that moment.
Hmm.
And I think that we can't lose sight of that. Um, so I think that's all part of the understanding the anchors and the engines, and managing, or not managing, but uh, nurturing those relationships that we have.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's thinking about, let's think about it as if we were running a race, right? We're a sprinter. If we're a sprinter, there's, if you thinking about the Olympics, you see a sprinter competing in the Olympics, and they all have very specific uniforms and shoes and things like that. Things that are designed to help them be more streamlined, to slice through the air more efficiently. They
Mm.
don't want things that create drag. They avoid things that create drag. So that's the same analogy. If we're trying to, sprint ahead, if we have things that create drag, we must understand, we may still get to the finish line, but it's going to slow down how fast we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So, the bottom line, as we said, is just, making sure that you um, truly pause and truly consider your relationships, um, because they are important for your survival, both for your, emotional well being, and for your, personal growth. And so, how you curate those relationships is really, really important, but you have to give it some thought, right? You have to give it some thought, and you have to recognize when you have some relationships that are weighing you down, in the sense that, slowing you down from achieving your goal, and slowing you down from, not really slowing you down,
There we go.
sapping your energy from, uh, moving forward and achieving your goals. So just have to be very cognizant of that for your own survival.
Uh-huh.
And you know, you were talking earlier about your environment and how that ties back to our conversation on habits. Let's tell our audience a little bit about that. Let's bring that back up for us.
Yeah. So, this conversation has been like a good marriage between, the episode that we had about community, and then some of those episodes we had earlier this year around habits. And in the habit space, particularly, we talked about how our environment impacts our outcomes. Prime example is, if, all right, I know that I've got to get some things done. If I go into my space where I'm supposed to be working, and I've got video game consoles, or in my 3D printer, and all these other things that could be distractions to me, I'm not setting myself up for success, because those things may pull my energy away from my objective. In a similar fashion, the people that we have around us kind of help build that environment. So our environment impacts our outcomes. If we have people in the space that are pulling our energy away from the goal, then, we may still get to the goal, but it's just going to take that much more energy to get there. And that's what we really have to take into account. The people around us are part of our environment, and our environment impacts our outcomes.
Absolutely. Okay, listeners. So here's your challenge. First and foremost, write down where it is that you want to go. What are your goals? What are you striving toward? What do you want to accomplish? Right. And those things can be personal, they can be professional, but like, what are you trying to accomplish? Right. Write that down. And then write down your 5 names. Write down the 5 names of the folks who are closest to you, that you spend the most time with. And then evaluate if those folks are actually the ones who are pushing you forward, or creating a little drag on you from reaching um, your end goal, right? And as we mentioned before, those folks who may be slowing you down are not bad people, love them to death, but just understand that those folks may not be the ones to help you move forward, in the quickest time frame, I guess, to reach your goal. So, determine if they are an anchor, determine if they're an engine. Then determine how you want to manage your time with those folks, right? You may want to spend a little less time with the folks that you consider anchors in your life and a little bit more time with those folks who are engines in your life. And then, and hopefully you have a good mix of folks in your life like that. And, and if not, I guess, then you have to make some different decisions on how to find some engines in your life. And sometimes that happens. You have to go out and find them. Um, and that again is a whole nother conversation. But there are events that I know they have that Eventbrite, that you can go on and find events that are happening in your area where you can go out and meet people who are like minded and get some positive energy, some things like that. But that's your challenge for this week, for this episode, and hopefully you will take that and actually apply it. And we would love to hear from you about your progress, or anything that you would like to share. So Frankie's going to tell you about where you can find us in all the social spaces and so forth. So you can just jump in there and leave us some DMs, leave us some comments, and we do read them and comment. So don't be afraid to give us some feedback on what's happening with you. And with
Yeah.
that, Frankie, yeah, go ahead, tell them, give us some last words, and then tell the folks where they can find us.
In terms of last words, I'll use the same phrase that I used earlier in the conversation. Iron sharpens iron. The people around us have an impact on our outcomes. And we just need to be honest about those impacts and take that into account as we're trying to pause, shift, and ignite to reach a new level. Now, in terms of reaching out to us, yes, come on down. Let's have a conversation. Come find us. You can go to our website. This is psipod.com for everything PSI Effect podcast related. You'll find all of our episodes, all the different podcast platforms where you can subscribe. So Amazon, Apple, Spotify, all the places. Go ahead, subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And then you can also see the full video on YouTube. You can use our handle at This Is PSI Pod, or just search for the PSI Effect Podcast. We also are on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and we do shorts on YouTube as well. All are available at This Is PSI Pod. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from you.
Perfectly put, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience. We really appreciate you being here in the space with us. We look forward to this time that we have with you every week. And so, again, hopefully you got some golden nuggets from us today. But just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. And so until next time, go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.